guys struggle with masculine cards? I used to too. Today I'm sharing my 3-step formula to creating masculine cards with ease. They're actually no different to cards with flowers. You just need to think a bit differently. When you think of masculine cards, think of clean and simple designs. Nothing too fussy. So think of using clean and simple sketches. Don't put too many layers and things on. So just keep it very simple. If they feel quick to make, then you're on the right track. So here I'm using a geometric landscape stencil by Altenew, and I'm using almond butter ink to blend in the background. And I've got a mini blending brush just to smooth everything together. You don't want to create too dark a base here because we're going to be adding charcoal to it. So just be mindful of that you're not creating so much depth that your charcoal won't show up. You'll notice I lift the stencil just to see how the colour's going. And then once you've finished the background, I just lift off the stencil, which I always think is the best bit, and put it to one side. I just think the reveal of stencils is so much fun. I used a craft card base there so that the white wasn't showing. We had nice craft lines instead. So before we get into tip 2, I just want to say I'm using a Derwent tinted charcoal pencil called Glowing Embers. And I'm going to tell you what I'm doing here now. So keeping the pencil at an angle, you're going to start adding some definition. So you can choose where you want to add shading. But the goal really here is to create some illusion that there's more depth to these triangles than originally seen. So you just draw in some thin lines and pressing very gently here, and you'll notice as I go further into the video, what I've learned is that actually holding the pencil at a lower angle, I've got it quite high here, but once you hold it at a lower angle, it actually works better. So I'm using a tortillon here to blend that colour out. I'm adding more pencil because I haven't put enough colour down to be able to blend it properly. So this is a tortillon, also known as a paper stump, and you can use miniature circles, so you're using it in a little circular pattern, or if you haven't put down the colour too much, you can actually just use straight lines. So you'll see I do a combination of both depending on how much pencil I've actually laid down. So why geometrics? Geometrics are great. Obviously, we all love flowers and cute animals and all of those kind of things, but actually geometrics are really nice for guys. I learnt this from the Altenew masterclass called For the Guys, and it was one of the masterclasses in the Altenew Certified Educator program, of which this video is actually it's my final assessment for level 2. But I learned lots of different things, and one of the things that really stuck with me was geometrics, because they're just so easy. You can get loads of geometric stencils. Altenew are fantastic for geometric stamps and stencils. So check those out, and you'll find you get a whole new theme really for your man cards, masculine cards, whatever you want to call them. So again, you'll see here, sorry for the couple of knocks on the table, you'll see here I'm blending things out, and already you can see that that triangle is taking shape. The important thing here is to keep the shading in exactly the same places for the inverted triangle and the upright triangle. So just make sure you're sticking to that, and other than that, you just keep going. This process takes about half an hour. Well, it did this one for me, but it's really relaxing. So I actually listened to a book while I was creating it. So you'll see I'm just pointing out to you to keep that shading exactly the same. And if the beauty of this is if you actually go too firm or press too firm, you can just get a normal eraser and just rub it out. And you can start again, so it doesn't matter. One thing to be mindful of is just to make sure your background's dry. So the third tip is to pick a colour palette. So here I kept it very simple. I went with the browns and the blacks. I knew that I wanted to make another card in this set that was going to have like a leather look to it, and I just really wanted to go with these kind of neutral colours. There are loads of different apps that you can get online that give you different colour combinations. So start to explore some of those, because once you've got 3 or 4 different colour palettes in your arsenal, you'll find everything a lot easier to make. Here's the finished background. Tell me, what's your favourite colour palette for masculine cards? Share in the comments below. So next we've got the banner, the sentiment that we're working on here. So I've cut a piece of craft cardstock that's big enough to cut out a slim line rectangle. You've then got Happy Anniversary from the All Too New Essential Elements set, and then I've got a piece of black cardstock to cut that out, and then there's a piece of white cardstock that we're going to use to put behind that, so that there's that white behind the black sentiment. So again, using almond butter, we're just going to ink blend that piece of cardstock. Again, it's always good if you're doing ink blending, if you want to create a darker colour, start with the cardstock that's nearly that kind of colour. So if you wanted a darker blue, start with the pale blue. Start with a light pink if you want a darker pink, that kind of thing. It saves your ink, it saves you time, and it's just a great way to use up some scraps as well. So just testing that against the front to make sure I was happy with the colour. I decided I wanted it slightly darker. So I've gone back in again with a little bit more of that almond butter. So you'll see then at the top I've die cut, I didn't bore you with the detail of it, but I die cut that strip sentiment. I die cut the black sentiment, and now I'm just sticking down the Happy Anniversary sentiment onto white cardstock so that I can then cut around it. I do faff a lot. This is me fiddling around with it. I just want you to see that sometimes it's not just bish bash bosh, the job's done. There's always a lot of faffing. I've just edited most of it out. So once that's stuck, I go in with my scissors and just cut around the edge to remove any excess. So we're just left with that black and white. You'll notice behind the craft, on the left hand side, you'll notice the black border. So what I did afterwards is I cut a strip of black card that fit perfectly behind the stitched slim line rectangle to layer everything on top of it. I haven't kept that footage in the video. Unfortunately, I lost that. So you'll see I'm just cutting away that extra bit there. There's a bit of white showing, so I just went in with my scissors at an angle to remove that excess white, and then I'm sticking it down onto the Happy Anniversary. Before we move on to the next step, take a quick second to hit the subscribe button under this video, then click on the bell so you don't miss any other video tutorials. So sometimes with these letter dies you get a little bit of a fraying from the cardstock, so I just go in with the pin and remove it. I'm just showing you there what I did with the black cardstock. So that's the sentiment now done and the card base. Next we're going to stamp the giraffe from the set Geometric Menagerie by All Too New. And the beauty of this simplicity of this design is you can mix the stencils, change the colours, change the stamps, and you'll create all sorts of different variations. So stamping him a couple of times just to make sure we get a good impression, and then putting the Misty to one side. Next up we're going to use the paints as a watercolour. And what we're going to do is use Delectable Delights ink set, which has got almond butter plus 3 other colours, which are milk chocolate, vanilla cream and hazelnut. So I'm smooshing the ink pads down onto a piece of acetate, and I'm going to use that as my paint palette. I'm spritzing it with water and then using a number 2 fine watercolour brush by All Too New. I'm going to pick up some paint and I'm going to add it to the giraffe. You'll see I've got a cloth there that I'm wiping paint onto. The reason for this is that this giraffe is actually take 2. Take 1, I had too much water, and at the end of it, all of the water started bleeding out down the side of his legs. So another reminder for me, and maybe for you, to make sure that you don't use too much water. So keep a cloth next to you and you can take off any excess water. You can also go back in and add ink if you want to, and you'll see me do this later where I want to darken up the milk chocolate. I want to make that a little bit more depth. And what you saw me do there, I don't know if you noticed, is I was removing some colour. So I had a little bit too much water. So what I did is cleaned my brush off onto my cloth and then use what they call a thirsty brush. And that's where you remove the excess water. So where you're brush is clean, you just go back over the place that's got too much water and use the brush to absorb that water up. So I'm working my way across the giraffe doing all different colours, and I am leaving a little bit of a gap because I want to do some black pen work, and so you'll see me coming in with that in a few minutes. And here's where I'm going back in with the darker milk chocolate. So I've just got the little ink cube and added a little bit more to the palette. Using the Unipin 0.5 marker, I'm just going in and adding some black. You'll notice I didn't really need to wait for the paint to dry because I didn't have it very wet. If I had have had it wet, I'd have waited a little bit or dried it off a bit, just so that I'm not diluting the black ink from the pen. I'm just randomly adding black to the giraffe across different areas and making sure that I don't overdo it so that it becomes all black, leaving some room for some paint. You may have noticed on the right hand side that I've got an ink splodge dripping down all the way down the side of the paper. I have noticed it, so don't panic. If you're a neat freak, it might upset you. So coming back in now with those extra colours, just to finish off the giraffe. There you go, all wiped up now, so you can be calm now again, not worrying about that ink smudging over everything. So again, just be careful of excess water. As I said, this was number 2. I put too much water on the first giraffe and it ended up bleeding out of the side of his legs. So just be very careful how much water you add. You can go back in and add colour, as you saw that I did with the milk chocolate. So there's the completed giraffe. I then die cut 2 extra giraffes, both in white cardstock. Normally I would use scrap, but I just had this sitting on the desk, so I've used the plain one. But normally I would use up old scraps of rubbish where I've misstamped and that kind of thing. So I'm just putting some glue on one giraffe. Sorry, it's gone off screen. And adding him onto that. And then I'm putting a second one on the back of him. And what this does is it creates a chipboard effect piece, if you like. So you've got a chipboard effect giraffe, and it just gives him a bit of dimension. But if I tried to put pop dots on him with his skinny legs and skinny neck, it would have been quite difficult to post. And so this way you know that you've got a firm chipboard effect. Off screen I've run the stencil background through a stitched rectangle die to create a border, a stitched border. And I'm now doing one of my little tricks of where I use my mini MISTI to get the background perfectly aligned onto the front of the card. I slot the card base into the mini MISTI, bottom left, with the door on the right hand side. I then put my stitched background onto that and just make sure it's stuck down really well. And that's a great way for you to make sure it's stuck all in the right place. And you can check if there's any overhang afterwards by just turning the card over. Next, we're sticking on the sentiment that's already been created, and then the last element of the card is to pop on that giraffe. For my glue, I use a combination of PVA craft glue mixed with a glue we have over in the UK called Gorilla Glue, and my husband mixed it up for me and I found it really, really useful. So here's a zoom in of the finished card and then a still of the card. Hope you've enjoyed today's lesson. More on my blog. As I said earlier in the video, I have created these as part of my final assessment for level 2. So I had to make an additional 3 cards and also an upcycled project. So these are the 3 cards using various techniques, which I've listed on my blog, and I created some affirmation cards. So if you're interested in a bit of floral, pop on over. And remember to subscribe to my channel. I'd absolutely love you to like, share and comment. Is there a product or technique you'd like me to feature in my next video? Share your requests and suggestions in the comments below.